straight away. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining in this evening's Q&A with the author Gary Lachman. I bid you welcome on behalf of Kensington Library. Gary Lachman is the author of a large opus of books on the subjects ranging from the evolution of consciousness and the history of the occult to popular culture and literary suicides. He has written biographies of Aleister Crowley, Rudolf Steiner, C.G. Jung, Madame Blavatsky, Emanuel Swedenborg, P.D. Uspensky and Colin Wilson, and histories of Hermeticism and the Western inner tradition. He has delved into the influence of esotericism on politics and society and has even penned a rock and roll memoir of the 1970s. He lectures regularly in the UK, US, and Europe, and his work has been translated into a dozen languages. We have hosted several of Gary's talks as part of our annual Fantasy February Festival of Talks, which we organized to promote the large collection of books about customs and folklore we have in Kensington Library. So we have heard him discuss the big beast, Aleister Crowley, P.D. Uspensky and Gurdjieff, and his books, Politics and the Occult, in our lecture theatre. At the last year's London History Festival, he talked about Esoteric London. So we are very happy that he has responded to our call to provide our audiences with this virtual session during the lockdown. This session is about his life and work generally, and you're invited to ask Gary any questions you have via the Q&A chat. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce Gary Lachman.
Well, thank you very much, Nina. And yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for asking me to have this evening. And thank you to everyone who's here. I can't see you, so I don't know exactly who I'm talking to. But thank you for coming this evening. And yeah, so I don't have anything prepared. So it's up to you to provide the stimulus for this evening. You are the content providers this evening. So I guess let's have the first question. Anyone there?
Yes, we have a question. When did you first become interested in esoteric ideas, Gary?
Well, I tell that story in several places, but it happened in one, and that was in New York in the spring of 1975, so a bit of time ago from now. And I was playing in a band that was unknown at that time, but would become very well known not too long after, Blondie. And we were living in a rather kind of dilapidated, illegal loft space on the Bowery. And this was when the Bowery was the Bowery, which was, you know, Skid Row. Not like it is today. It's all been built up and there are very expensive hotels there and things like that. But Chris and Debbie, guitarist and singer in the band, they had sort of a kitschy interest in kind of occult things. They had, you know, like voodoo dolls and upside down pentagrams and things like that. I don't think they took it very seriously, but it was kind of a, you know, kind of aesthetic. But the fellow who, well, he rented us the floor we had on the Bowery. He was this flamboyant artist, and he was very interested in Aleister Crowley. And he had a copy of the Crowley tarot deck, and he would do these impromptu tarot readings, and he painted these canvases based on the trumps. And I had no interest in that sort of thing before. My only interest in sort of magic and the occult was through sort of fiction, H.P. Lovecraft and horror films in the 30s and the 40s and that sort of thing. But in that milieu, I just got interested in it, and I started reading about Crowley. But then I came across a book by Colin Wilson, who's a well-known British writer, and it was a book called The Occult. And it was this huge tome. And I started reading it, and it just grabbed me. And it was through that, really, that I became interested in all these sorts of things. So I was reading about the stuff that I went later, back then in 1975.
So how do you understand the term occult? Could you surmise it? What does it mean to you? What does esoteric means? What does occult mean?
Well, occult just means hidden or occluded. Occultation. When we have an eclipse, when the moon passes between the Earth and the Sun, the moon occludes the sun for that time, and the light goes out. It gets dark. So that's basically what it means. So it's not seen. So it's not perceived by the senses. And Isaac Newton, who wrote more about alchemy than he did about gravity, you could say he was an occultist, because gravity itself is an unseen force, a power. No one's ever seen it. You know, we don't perceive it. We perceive its effects, but we don't perceive gravity itself. And so, in that sense, but at the time when Newton was interested in all this sort of thing, it was known as the occult sciences. So this is the Hermetic tradition. And esotericism means the inner meaning of something. You have the exoteric is the outer, the surface, and then the core of something is the esoteric. And that's related to the occult. It's hidden insofar that it's not on the surface. And most religions have, or the major world religions have an esoteric side or center to them. So in Islam, Sufism is the esoteric side of Islam, and in Judaism, Kabbalah is the esoteric side. There's a Christian esotericism, actually sort of known as Theosophy, but that name has become more associated in recent times, more modern times, with Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. It means wisdom of the gods. So it's, and it also has to do with how you read certain texts. You know, there's a surface meaning, and then there's a meaning that's sort of underneath that. And this has to do with different levels of being and different levels of human consciousness or mind and all that. So those two things are related.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions. They're published on the side. One is from Ruth May, who says, "Hi, I've read a number of your books and your style is very professional, academic, and objective. Are you willing to discuss what your own personal religious or spiritual beliefs are?"
Yeah, sure. When lockdown's over, send me an email. No, I'm joking. I mean, I think if you read my books, and you could more or less tell the sorts of ideas and sorts of ways of looking at the world that I'm interested in, and I'm you know, attracted to. So I was brought up Catholic, but I stopped going to church when I was 13. You know, I don't like to use sort of kind of high-sounding words like seeker and all that sort of thing, but I just gradually became more and more interested in these kinds of questions about human destiny and the meaning of life and all these kind of big questions that you're not supposed to ask in the post-everything world, because we all know that's all, you know, there is no meaning, it's meaningless and all that. And I would say even today we're feeling the effect of that on the sort of street level. It's what I call trickle-down metaphysics, you know, where, say 150 years ago, this notion that God is dead and there's no meaning to life, and all of our great truths and everything were unstable and were shaky. And it took about 150 years for it to hit the street level. It trickled down from the high peaks of metaphysics down to the lowlands of every day. And but you know, there's people who have influenced me a great deal. I mean, obviously Colin Wilson is one of those, if you know my work. I've been very influenced by, in the esoteric sort of world, Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, and Rudolf Steiner and Jung. I would say those are the kind of, the four major names in the sort of esoteric world whose ideas I've studied and also, practiced at different times and in different ways. So, I mean, I guess in one sense, I would say I'm an existentialist because I'm fundamentally interested in meaning, you know, what's you know, why are we here? What's it all about? And what are we supposed to do now that we find ourselves in it? And so I think those are, you know, these are the kind of fundamental, you know, limit questions that are asked by, well, religion used to pursue that, and they seem to got lost in the shuffle. So I mean, that kind of thing, you know, that's the sort of thing I would say is like the fundamental kind of you know, project I'm working on.
Okay, and so how would you, is there a correlation, or how do you see the correlation between the mainstream religion and esoteric ideas or things that are from the other side? Are the religions just more successful secret teachings, as it were?
Well, I mean, you know, I mean, the major religions, they have, as I said, there's this outer, you know, the face that shows the outer world, and that's the world, that's the face we know of the religion mostly. I mean, the religion I know most of, just because I grew up in it, was Christianity, and so, you know, there was everything at the church and all that, and there's a whole social element in religion as well. So there's I mean, that's the other thing too. I mean, where I would say, what do you want to say? Sort of the exoteric religion, it provides the answers, it provides the guidelines, and it basically says, look, you know, here's a more or less tried and true, tested way to be in the world and lead a good life, you know, and so if you just follow these guidelines and rules, you know, you're pretty guaranteed that you'll make the grade and all that sort of thing. And, you know, many people in different ways are attracted by that. It's not only in the religions, they're attracted by that in the alternatives as well, the alternative religions and spiritual paths, and, you know, different people get involved in different gurus and things like that. They're looking for someone to give them the answer, and they diligently, you know, apply themselves to pursuing the path that is indicated to them. But then in the esoteric, you would say, are the people that they don't want to be given a set of rules to follow. They want to be able to have the experiences themselves, and this is, the esoteric is lined up with the notion of what's called Gnosis, which is a way of knowing. I mean, what we have the slide up here now, the you know, you have the natural world there, and then the alchemist, the Hermetic, you know, a philosopher, the seeker of wisdom, pierces the veil of the natural world, and he sees, you know, the higher worlds behind and all that. And this is a moment of Gnosis, which is knowing. It's a Greek word for knowledge, but it's a knowledge that comes to you direct. It's not acquired. The other Greek word for knowledge, episteme. So in philosophy, you have the discipline of epistemology. You know, how do we know what we know, and things of that sort, and what constitutes knowledge. And yes, the analytical, philosophical mind, which is a very good one. I've pursued that path, you know, personally, and also in brief time in academia and all that, which I'm not now. I'm not an academic. I'm not associated with any university or academy or anything like that. Only kind of tangentially, but this Gnosis isn't something that you can pursue in that way. It's an experience knowledge. It's a knowledge that's also an experience. And to me, that ties it in with the existentialists too, because they were philosophers and they were interested not necessarily in Gnosis, but they were interested in these authenticity. This kind of, you know, when you have an experience that's you know, real in the sense of your being. You're not living in a false way, which is something, you know, a secular kind of original sin. You know, we live inauthentic lives and all that. So I mean, this is something that I write about in different books in different ways. This pursuit of this kind of inner path and the experience of Gnosis.
Thank you. I have another question from David. Have you personally experienced any strange mystical experiences?
Well, I mean, you know, I mean, there's moments, but they're not things that it's not the sort of thing that I want to say, oh, and this happened. I mean, I'm actually, though, what I'm doing now is I'm working on a book about precognitive dreams. And these will be about my own dreams in which I dreamt a little bit of the future, like something that would happen that day or the next day. Although there's a couple dreams where it's actually a few years is the time lag between. So in that sense, which I wouldn't call those mystical, although larger, sort of umbrella over, the occult or the esoteric, that would get included in there, and things related to that, sort of strange moments, experiencing time in unusual sorts of ways, but I mean, yeah, I'm more along the lines of, okay, I've had a moment of something rather like the kinds of things I'm writing about. So what can I learn from that, rather than kind of blow my horn about it? Sort of how can I bring that into my own experience and also understand it? It informs what I'm writing about too, and that's what makes it real for me. Put it that way, is that I realize in the real sense of what that means. It realizes making something real, something I knew abstractly. Then you have a kind of taste of it or a little experience of it. Then it becomes, again, that's a kind of moment of gnosis, or a moment of authentic being, or something like that. A little, glimpse of it. So yeah, things like that. But in this book I'm doing on precognitive dreams, I'll be talking quite a bit about these dreams I had where I dreamt the future. And it's not, I didn't predict anything. It's not as if I sort of woke up thinking, oh my God, this is going to happen. It wasn't that. I would find out later on that day or the next day or whatever. As I said, there's one case, it was a period of over 4 years.
Great. So another question from Matos. Hi, Gary. First of all, thanks a ton for thanks for tons of inspiration. Forgive me. Every time I'm reading one of your books, I'm wondering, how is it possible to collect and connect such an amount of information as you did? How do you manage to read so much? Did you have to resign from your job to read?
Well, I more or less was reading all the time, and very, very lucky that I've been able to make a living from doing it. But not only the reading, I have to write as well. So yeah, I mean, I just, I've always been a reader, when I was a kid, and it's, something now. I mean, that would be the worst kind of torture for me if someone ever wanted to get me to talk. They would just deprive me of a book for a few days, and I'd be willing to do anything. But yeah, I just read a lot, and I mean, I like finding connections between things and sort of slotting them into place. And it's not so much a system as that it all seems, I don't know how to say it. It seems something that's there already, and I'm, rather than forging these connections, I'm sort of understanding that they're there already. And I think, fundamentally, the people that I'm writing about, like Jung and Steiner and Uspensky and Gurdjieff and others, they're all talking about the same thing. It is about this, what do you want to call it, other side of ourselves, or unused part of ourselves, which is it's unhuge. I mean, it's sort of, it's not as if it's just a little bit that we didn't get to. It's we are only a tiny bit of what is potentially part of us, and they're all talking about first understanding that's the case, and then having some experience of it, and then having some way to approach it. And I mean, I've tried different things over the years, and I think, yeah, I mean, most of them, in some central way, are kind of aiming at the same thing. So so that's what I've done. I've read and tried, and I've been reading this sort of stuff. I said I started in 1975. So what is that? 45 years ago. So I'm hoping to get, I'm hoping to get my head around it pretty soon.
But still, it's thinking and reading about subjects, being interested in them, and then deciding to actually produce a book, two quite different things.
Yeah.
I have a question here somebody anonymously saying, "Hi Gary, I would like to ask you a more technical question regarding the craft of writing. How do you go about writing books like yours? Do you have a very tight work structure, so research first, plan the book second, write the book third, or is your work process more relaxed and intuitive? Any advice for aspiring non-fiction writers?"
Your two best friends are a word count and a deadline. And if you can't meet those, then don't give up the day job. But for myself, what I usually do is I just read as much about something that I'm going to write about, and I'm going to write about it because I'm interested in it. But I've also got a publisher who thinks that basically they can sell a book about that. There's a readership for it, and so yeah, once that happens, then it usually takes about a year. Could take a bit longer. I mean, the last book I did, which is coming out actually next week, called The Return of Holy Russia, although it won't be available here in the UK, I think, until June, and I'm not even sure now with the crisis about shipping and all that. I haven't seen a copy of it yet, but yeah, it's called The Return of Holy Russia, and that took me a bit longer, but that turned into an epic, and the book I'm working on now will be shorter. So, but usually about a year, so 6 months reading, and then a few weeks going through this painful but unavoidable kind of passage from doing the reading to going over your notes, and then to finally, facing the empty computer screen and starting writing. And with any luck, yeah, you meet the deadline within the word count. And what I like about it is it gives me an opportunity to, if it's a book about someone that I'm interested in and have read a lot about already, like Rudolf Steiner, then I get an opportunity to say, well, this is how I understand Steiner, and this is why Steiner is important to me. And I mean, I have a personal view. My sort of point of view is there in the book, and it's I'm engaging with these people. They're very important, but at the same time, I have a kind of critical conversation with that. And if it's a book like the one I just did about Russia, about which I didn't know too much about Russian history, about the revolution. That's about it. I know more now. I get a kind of education from it, and then I'm also very informed about this other side of the world, this other side of the planet. It's very active in things these days.
Thank you. I have a question that ties in with this from Mark. He says, Blavatsky, Gurdjieff, and Ouspensky are important figures in esotericism, but where do you put Rudolf Steiner in terms of importance and influence?
Well, Steiner is very important, and he's, in one sense, he's one of the most influential in terms of the outer world. I mean, Blavatsky in her day and in sort of immediately after, the Theosophical Society was immensely important. I say in my book about her, she was she's one of the architects of the modern world, along with Darwin, Marx, and Freud, and so on. But then Theosophy kind of lost its kind of impact on the wider cultural world into the 20th century. And Steiner, all the biodynamic farming, the Waldorf education, the anthroposophical medicine, eurythmy, all of these kind of offshoots from his main interest, which was really about epistemology. I mean, it comes out of philosophy. He blended together sort of German idealism and this kind of way of using the imagination to understand the world that he got from Goethe, and then he blended that with what he picked up from Theosophy. I mean, Steiner was a very good he was a very good syncretist. He was able to bring lots of things together, and then he made his own kind of system, which owes a lot to Madame Blavatsky. But I mean, as I said, people buy health products or well-being products or organic produce and things of that sort that come out of the Steiner teaching, and they might not even know that. They just recognize that it's a good organic product. So I mean, he's very influential. And there's, I mean, in other ways too. That's why I say in the book. I mean, these people, they are who they are historically. Then they are, who people today, how people today understand them, because there's the Theosophical Society, the Anthroposophical Society, but they also have an impact on the culture, and it kind of radiates out. And unless you do a little bit of homework, you might not know that they're the center point. So I mean, Steiner is very influential in the modern arts as well.
There's a question from Shalagi, who says Rudolf Steiner speaks about the physical incarnation of Ahriman. Can you say more about it?
Yeah, well, Steiner, he believed there were these two fundamental kind of opposing but necessary, contrary sort of forces, spiritual forces that manifest in the material world as well, influencing humanity, mankind. And one was Lucifer, and one was Ahriman. And Lucifer is a more kind of flamboyant, revolutionary, rebellious, hot, fiery kind of character. He's the fallen star. But Ahriman is this kind of dead, heavy, materialistic, mechanistic, heavily rational, scientific vision. And Steiner believed that around the 3rd millennium AD, so I mean the ETA for Ahriman was still quite a bit ahead, that Ahriman was going to incarnate. But things were moving towards that. I mean, Steiner has this vast vision of the evolution of the cosmos, which is this evolution of consciousness and the evolution of the cosmos happen parallel. They're part of the same thing. Actually, they're two sides of the same reality. And so he sees things in terms of these thousands of years and things of that sort. And so yeah, but one wonders. I mean, I raised this question in my book about Trump, called Dark Star Rising, which is about Trump and this kind of occult politics that was happening around him. Whether Ahriman might be arriving a bit earlier because of our kind of it almost seems inevitable absorption or sort of what do you want to call it? I don't know. Being penetrated by technology, and more and more people are concerned or aware, or it's just happening. And this was something that Steiner was concerned about. He talks about these Ahrimanic spirits in machines, and I mean, who knows what he would have said about computers and the whole virtual world we live in today, which we're all dependent on now, which we're using right now. So I mean, he did have much good to say about the cinema in the 20s. He has some lectures on the debilitating effects of the cinema on the etheric body and things of that sort. So I mean, all of us must be, if that's the case, we must need a lot of work. So you can take all this stuff with certain grains of salt, and that's what I tend to do in my books about these people. But still, I think there's plenty there that we can profit from by knowing about.
Okay, so there's a question from Helen Davis. Do you pray and do you meditate? Furthermore, how does your belief system influence your behavior in the world?
Well, the thing I pray for most is, like the next book, to tell you the truth, because it's like a working actor. You're only as good as your next film. But I wouldn't say I necessarily pray, but I don't know. I think like anybody else, I try to, as you say, have the ideas and philosophies and teachings and all that I've managed to get some idea about, to inform my life. But I mean, I think in some ways I'm very lucky because I'm able to devote pretty much all of my time to doing this. So in a way, I kind of live like a monk in many ways, and especially now with the lockdown and all that. And so, in one sense, I'm one of the lucky ones now because it hasn't been too much of an impact on me. It's inconvenient, and I'm well aware of its impact on other people and all of that. But it's I'm kind of prepared for it because I kind of live live in my own little world already, and so it's become, you know, sort of what I'm doing is, you know, part of this. Oh, you know, I have to deal with the real world, of course, because I have to, you know, meet deadlines and arrange for talks like this and other things, and that's the other thing too. What's happening, you know, quite a few things got canceled. I was supposed to have been in Denmark last month, and something today, it was supposed to be happening out in Devon, and things of that sort. So, you know, adjusting to doing things like this online. You know, it's you know, I think that that's one of the things. How do we kind of, you know, bring the two sort of things together, or make a space for those things? And I think, you know, we all kind of try to manage that in our own ways.
People really want to know about this, because I have another question from Mateusz. They maintain any spiritual practice on the daily basis? Simple Eastern style meditation, Steiner exercises, or maybe full-blown magical Indian rituals?
Well,
let me just read it through.
Okay. No, I mean, I get the fundamental idea. I mean, what I've been doing most recently for the last, say, year and a half is I've been gone back to writing down my dreams a lot, and I've been doing that. So, and it was in some ways out of doing that the idea to do this book about my own precognitive dreams. So, I mean, in that sense, but I mean, I hesitate to say I'm on this path and doing that kind of thing. I think it's sort of like, you know, I made it my life to be interested in all these sorts of things. So in terms of practice, so what I'm doing these days is I'm paying a lot of attention to my dreams, doing a lot of work in that realm, and you know, things that are attendant around that. The things that I'll be talking about in this book is about synchronicities, because they're related to precognitive dreams and things of that sort. I mean, in a general kind of thing, I do my best to try to be awake, and I also do my best to remember to do that. I mean, many years ago, I was involved in the Gurdjieff work, but this is a long time ago. This is back in the 1980s. And I got a lot out of that time that I was doing that. And since then, I mean, at a different time, I didn't become an anthroposophist, but when I was very interested in Steiner, I was practicing a lot of the exercises that he has in his book, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment. And I mean, I talk a little bit about that in the beginning of my Steiner book. I mean, I'm in a way, I'm kind of private about these sorts of things, and I'm more interested in, yeah, I mean, okay, so what did I get from that? And how does that inform how I understand these things? Because with any luck, you know, your experience will inform your understanding of it, and then your understanding of it can inform your experience, because then you know exactly what you're experiencing. A lot of people have experiences, but you know, it's kind of like they're not necessarily fundamentally changed by it, or they don't bring much back from the experience. And in a way, I'm more interested in my everyday experience of the world rather than trying to have a spiritual experience, or certainly you don't try to have a peak experience. I mean, peak experiences just come. So that's one thing that I mean, and if you're having a peak experience, or if you have synchronicities happening around you, then in some ways you kind of, you know, you're in the zone, as they say, sort of already, and it's sort of understanding, oh, okay, well, what's going on in me when that's happening? So in that sense, so I mean, I try to, you know, pay a lot of attention to what's going on inside my head, you know, and that's. This is where I think there's a meeting ground between the kind of esoteric psychology of something like the Fourth Way, Gurdjieff, or even Steiner, any of these things, and a kind of more mainstream philosophical pursuit that's known as phenomenology, which is a mouthful, but it's basically trying to understand states of consciousness and sort of recognize the differences between them and things of that sort. It's a bit much to go into now, but in a way, Steiner was a phenomenologist. That he brought that over into the spiritual world. His early work with Goethe, which is what got him going. You know, because all the stuff Goethe called it active seeing, and it was a whole way to interact with the natural world through using imagination, not to create an alternative world or a fantasy world, but to have a more intimate, participatory experience with the outer world.
And we have a question from Constantine, who says, "Hi Gary, you recently posted one of your dreams from back in 1998. Could you please tell us more about your dreams? Do you access Gnosis in yours? Thank you."
Well, that was funny. Well, it's one of these strange, I don't know what you want to call it, synchronicity, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's a few weeks ago now, maybe a bit more than it. I was going through these dream journals I've had since going back to the 1980s, and there was one in 1998. Within the dream, someone tells me to, stay home. There's no reason to go outside. Just stay home where it's safe. And that was at the same time that this was the message that we were getting and still getting. And stay home. Protect the NHS, save lives. And I thought that was rather strange. And not only was it strange, but it was strange because I rediscovered this dream because I'm researching a book about my precognitive dreams. So I'm not saying that particular dream was precognitive, but I would say that my finding it then and there at the same time as this was the message that was on TV and the radio and everywhere else was, I would say that qualified as a synchronicity. But I mean, dreams are very, there's all different kinds of dreams, at least my experience. And this is what I've come to understand that most of the people I've been reading about, dreams say, they just like our conscious experience is very different. Sometimes we're, very alert and sharp, and sometimes we're very, hazy and fuzzy, and so likewise dreams. I've had some dreams which are, talk about HD and virtual reality. I mean, they pale by comparison to the sort of crackle of reality in this very vivid sorts of dreams, and then in lucid dreams, the kind of dreams where you're dreaming. And then I've had dreams that are just, very, very kind of dull and boring, or very hazy and muddled. So I'm trying to understand how in the first place, how could I mean, whether it's in dreams or not, just how you could possibly be, precognitive, know that something's going to happen before it even happens, and that brings in time. So what I'm trying to do in this book is understand the relationship between dreams and time, and there's other people who've explored this. There was a fellow in the 1920s called J.W. Dunn, wrote a famous book called An Experiment with Time, and he was one of the first ones who started writing about that. He realized that he was just dreaming bits of the future. Nothing. I mean, some cases, rather, big kinds of things, but much of it rather trivial, everyday sort of events. And what made them interesting was that he happened to dream about them in advance. And I read his book, and I just started writing down my dreams. This was in 1980, so this is 40 years ago, and I've been doing that since at different times, more or less, different times I haven't written them down, but still quite a lot since 1980. And I too found the same thing. I found just these sort of trivial everyday kinds of things, I dreamt them in advance. And so there's those kinds of dreams, and then you have, like I said, lucid dreams. So there's a whole variety of different kinds, and then there's the whole, like with Jung, you just had a picture of Jung there. So I mean, Jung's whole idea of dreams are a way that we can sort of bring the two sides of ourselves together. The conscious ego, which is me, who's talking now, but in the back of my head, or wherever you want to say, I'm getting kind of inspiration to respond to these questions from what Jung would call the unconscious. And the unconscious is where our dreams come from, and fantasies. And I mean, I'm very interested in this in-between state called the hypnagogic state, which is in between sleep and waking. And you can kind of watch dreams start to form, and you can, if you manage to practice it, you can start to interact with what's happening. I haven't quite managed to do that just yet, but I have quite a few accounts of what I'm seeing as I'm falling asleep, and it tends to be self-symbolic. It tends to be a kind of symbolic representation of either what you were thinking about, how you're feeling, or your emotional state, and it shows that's an intelligence. But it's an intelligence that doesn't speak in the way I'm speaking now with words and concepts. It speaks in images and metaphors and symbols and poetry, and also jokes and plays on words and puns, which are metaphors of a different kind. And so, I mean, that to me, that opened up trying to understand my own dreams, which, you know, I can't say I understand all of them, but, you know, some of them I think I got, you know, some insight into. It's understanding that language, you know, how they speak. And it's very much along the lines of what I talk about in my book, Lost Knowledge of Imagination, this sort of more poetic, metaphoric way of understanding the world, and it has to do with the right brain and things of that sort.
Right. And thank you for that. We've got Ruth May asking, what do you think about the relationship between religion, faith, and power? Have you ever been tempted to start your own cult?
No. I had my own band. That was enough. I had two of them actually, so that was enough.
It was a cult band.
I think this is the great temptation. I mean, my book on Trump is called you know, Dark Star Rising: Magic and Power in the Age of Trump, and I mean, fundamentally, that's the temptation of any kind of magical power and that sort of thing. But it would emerge from, well, Jung would say it would emerge from our shadow and all that sort of thing. And but no, I mean, I had my own band. I mean, when I was young, when I was a rock and roller back in the day, I wanted to be famous and all that, and I had a big ego. I still have a big ego, but you know, it went from you know, trying to be a rock star to writing, you know, 20-something books. So, I mean, at a certain point, right about 1981 was when I sort of retired at the age of 25, because the last band I played in was with Iggy Pop. I did 2 tours with him. When I left Blondie, I had my own band called The No in LA, New York. And The No, K-N-O-W, that came from my interest in Gnosticism. And I mean, you know, the song that I was a hit that I wrote, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, was a hit here in the UK and in Europe. But I mean, that's about these telepathic dreams I had with my girlfriend back then. So, I mean, I didn't write books about this stuff then, but I wrote a song about it. And I think it's the only song in the top 10 that has theosophy in the lyrics. So,
yes,
yeah.
We have a question from Frank about that. He says, hello, Gary, thanks for doing this Q&A. How much of an effect did your interest in the occult influence the song Presence Dear? Was theosophy a profound influence in your life at the time?
No, it wasn't. It just was a word I picked up from what I was reading at the time. And it worked, you know, it fit the rhyme. But the whole idea of the song came from, well, when I first tour I did with Blondie, we were the opening act for Iggy Pop, and this was 1977, spring. Yeah, would have been sort of, I don't know, March, April, or something like that. Any case, and actually, David Bowie was the keyboardist, but he was incognito. He was playing, but he wasn't announced that he was playing. So on that tour, it turned out that whenever I wanted to call my girlfriend, she was trying to call me at the same time, or vice versa, or we would talk to each other and we would have similar dreams and things of that sort. And this was, you know, around the time that I was, well, she took those photos, Lisa Jane Persky. She's not in them, but she took both of those photos. And yeah, so we were reading, I was reading all this stuff. And once I read Colin Wilson's book, The Occult, I just started buying. And it was a great golden age of pop occultism, because all the bookshops had discounted reprints of classic stuff, and there were tons of books about everything: precognition, out-of-the-body experiences, astral traveling, reincarnation, tarot, and I just ate it up. I read all of it and was taking books out of the library, and then I met Lisa. She got interested in it too, and then it turned out, oh, we're having these dreams, and so I just picked up the guitar one day, and because of that, I was thinking about that, it turned into that song, and theosophy just hit the, you know, the kind of the right, you know, lyric. Yeah, I mean, that's, and then, as I said, when I left, you know, Blondie, and I formed my own band, The No, I got that title, that name from, I was reading a lot about Gnosticism and Jung and things of that sort. And then, but then after I played, we didn't get a record deal. We did a couple things. We had a single, and, you know, but we didn't get a record deal. And then I just, you know, was a guitarist with Iggy for 2 tours, and then I dropped out. And that's when I just moved out of music, and I just, well, I was lucky enough to have made some money from Presence Dear that I didn't have to work for a couple of years, really. And I traveled, I read a lot, 1983, I went to England. I came here, and among other, I went on what I call a mini search for the miraculous, and we went to, well, we were in Europe, on the continent. I love saying that. We're on the continent as well, and we were at Chartres Cathedral and Notre Dame, and we found Gurdjieff's Priory, where he had his Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man in Fontainebleau outside of Paris, and then we were in England. We went to Stonehenge and Avebury and Glastonbury, and then I made a personal solo pilgrimage down to Cornwall to meet Colin Wilson. That's where he lived, and we started a correspondence and a friendship then that lasted until he died in 2013. So.
About Colin Wilson, can I just squeeze in one more question, although it's sent by the anonymous, but I think it might fit in with what you were saying just now. It's, do you think the use of hallucinogenics like mescaline or magic mushrooms are a valid way of experiencing the spiritual world?
Well, I think you can get insights from them. I mean, I'm not a big fan of psychedelics myself, because I don't know. I mean, I found them interesting, but as I said before, I'm kind of more interested in everyday consciousness and trying to understand, because what we take is everyday and normal is actually subnormal. And those moments of peak experiences or enlightenment or whatever you want to call them, sudden moments of joy and delight, for some reason or other, the lights are turned on for real. Things start working for real, and it's like, okay, what's happening then? And so, in a way, it's kind of like learning how not so much to induce these experiences, but learn how to inhibit the kind of. It's kind of like reflexes we have, kind of out of habit, we act in a certain way. Getting a little technical in that way, but I mean, I've experimented with some of those things. I mean, I preferred mushrooms, and I've taken them to LSD. LSD felt like I had my finger in an electric socket for about 10 hours, and everything was sweating, and it was made of tinsel. So that was me. So I'm not saying it can't be valid for somebody else, but I think like anything else, if it becomes something that becomes a lifestyle, I think you do all the time, then I don't know. So, but everybody has to decide for themselves. But I know for myself. I mean, I have my own kind of private stimulants and so on. So but yeah, fine. But one question I have asked is, has there been a great work of literature, a great work of art, or so on produced from that? I'm not saying there hasn't been interesting stuff produced out of it. And obviously, there have been artists who have produced, paintings under the influence, and people like Huxley and others have written about it, but not while under the influence. They've written about it outside of it. And I think for me, one of the things that maybe not as attracted to it was that I want to be able to understand what's going on, rather than just letting go and go with it and all that. That may be a problem in me, but that's sort of what my initial sort of reflex is. It's like, okay, what's going on? And when that became kind of dulled, it just I just kind of lost interest in it. But again, that these things, it's all very personal, how you approach them.
So Matthew wants to know, have any of the paths you've personally experienced led to any noticeable awakening in you? I remember you sharing your memories of one with me with a Groundhog Day connection, but don't know if it changed you. That's from Matthew.
I'm trying to remember what that is. Yeah, there's things that changed me. The funny thing is nobody else noticed it, but no, it's a joke. But yeah, I mean, there's different. Well, I can pinpoint certain different moments when things. I mean, I talked about I said in the beginning of the book on Steiner, I talk about how I was just taking a walk in my neighborhood and I came across a sort of rose bush, and I looked at the rose, and I had been practicing some of these disciplines that Steiner has in knowledge of, the higher world's entertainment. And what I say in the book is that I felt that I had somehow, I wasn't just seeing the rose, I was cradling it, as if my awareness of it or my vision of it was somehow, grabbing it. It was kind of like 3D in that sense, tactile and that kind of thing. In the book I did about Ouspensky, in the second edition, there's a paperback edition. They added a article, an essay I'd written about some of my experiences in the work, when I was in the work back in the early 80s. And I do talk about, certainly there was one time when I was, you're doing the things, you're doing all the gardening, you're painting the fence, you're doing all that stuff, but I can remember picking up the leaves, and it was that kind of, remarkable feeling of, whoa, this is a leaf. How strange, where did that come from? And again, that to me, the content of the mystical experience is absolutely the same as the content of everyday experience. It's just that we're sort of, we're seeing it without this kind of involuntary kind of inhibition of our own consciousness that we've come to adopt by habit, and we're unaware that we are, that's what's happening. And that's a long-winded way of saying, as Ouspensky and Gurdjieff said, that we're asleep in that sense, and we're mechanical in that sense. And there's different ways to approach that. I mean, Gurdjieff had a very vigorous, at times, quite, hair-raising approach to it. Ouspensky had a bit more, systematic and methodical and so on. And Jung talks about something else, but there's a lot of similarities between them. But fundamentally, that's it. And those moments. I mean, just recently here, when this beginning of this lockdown happened, some early April, when we had a few very warm days, and I have a little garden here, and I was sitting in the sun, and I started laughing, because what had happened was that this notion of crisis, I was saying to myself, I was experiencing exactly what I talk about when I'm talking about what Colin Wilson's kind of fundamental idea is that, well, he calls it the paradoxical nature of freedom, in the sense that when we have freedom, we often don't know what to do with it, but when it's threatened, we'll fight, to the last to regain it and maintain it and protect it. And I said earlier tonight that I sort of live like a monk already, to some degree. So again, I feel very much for the people who are more severely affected, but for me, it's just been, a bit inconvenient. But I found myself sitting in the garden, and somehow the urgency of it's an emergency now had made me involuntarily do this kind of thing, where you sort of you kind of pull yourself together. You kind of you give yourself an involuntary command to sort of be, more alert. And I just found myself suddenly filled with a sense of delight and happiness, and thinking how lucky I am, to have this garden here now. But I have it all the time anyway. I've taken it for granted. I mean, I think that this is one of the fundamental things, what happens when we take things for granted? We know we want that. I know I'm lucky I have this. I'm more lucky than ever now, because there's many people who don't have the garden. Many people are stuck in one room. This is, what can you say? It's horrible. But I had this moment of thinking, oh, you idiot, you always have this. You always have this freedom, and you're very lucky to have this freedom. But somehow, here's an example of the very thing you write about, is that, this notion of crisis in some way has put you on the alert, and you've involuntarily given yourself the command to, be more solid, and your sense of being has become more intense, and you're appreciating all these things around you. And the idea is, okay, how to maintain that? And that's what it always is. It's what Colin Wilson calls the challenge of no challenge. We're at our best when we're facing an emergency. We're at our best when we're facing a challenge, because we push past this, what he calls the robot. We push past this, this kind of, what do you want to call it? This kind of the person who holds the purse strings on our energy, who, ooh, oh no, we don't really need that much. And then, no, it's an emergency. Open the safe and let's have it. And you're filled with it. And well, we do that. We somehow do that because we recognize the emergency, but we don't know how to do it without the emergency. I mean, that's why, there's a famous story Colin Wilson tells about the writer Graham Greene, who when he was a teen, he was bored to tears, and he got so bored to tears that he knew his brother had a revolver, and he took it out to the common, and he going to play Russian roulette with it, and he put it to his head. And when he pulled the trigger, there was a click, and it was empty. Obviously, he didn't kill himself. He wouldn't have written all those novels. But he didn't kill himself. But he had gone like this, and I'm doing a column because anybody's seen any columns talks, this is what he does. He went like that, and when he opened his eyes and realized he didn't blow his brains out, everything around him seemed infinitely interesting and exciting and stimulating. Where 20 seconds before, he was so bored to tears with everything, he was willing to chance blowing his brains out. But what happened? Nothing happened to the outer world. It was exactly the same. Something happened to Graham Greene. He went like that. And that's what happened to me when I was sitting out in my garden. I didn't go as much as he did, but it's a crisis, and da-da-da. And I just, ooh. And this is why people, there's not too many around today's, but people who, were around during the Blitz, they often said later on it was the best time of their life, because they obviously it's dangerous and people were killed, but it's sort of, they felt life, they were living authentically, in that sense, they were more awake and that kind of thing. The problem is, once the crisis goes, we go back into taking everything for granted. So how can we maintain that sense of emergency without the emergency? That I would say that's the fundamental problem. And the fact that I recognize it and that I had a little bit of experience of it, I have no excuse for not being able to pursue this.
Yes, the best description I heard in my own reading on this about how to self-remember in the context of Gurdjieff's teaching was his illustration of the state of self-remembering as when you are in a car crash and everything seems to be, there's time for everything, a second lasts for an eternity, and that this type of heightened consciousness is really what we are aiming at when we're trying to do all of these exercises. I would like to ask you, you have written a book about P.D. Ouspensky. He was a disciple of Gurdjieff's, and I was wondering, why write about the disciple and not about the master?
Well, he was more than a disciple of Gurdjieff. That's one thing. And the other thing is there's many, many books about Gurdjieff, but there's not too many about Ouspensky. And I didn't add the subtitle in the book, but it is true that he was a genius in his own right, and he was overshadowed by Gurdjieff. And my first introduction to Gurdjieff's ideas was through Ouspensky. I came across a copy of The Fourth Way, I think, for anything else. But I had read his earlier book, Tertium Organum and New Model of the Universe, and they were my real introduction to kind of the esoteric kind of thing. And then I later read In Search of the Miraculous. But I think in some ways, what I argue in the book is I think in some ways, Gurdjieff, I don't know, he was a bit unkind to Ouspensky. I mean, I'll go so far to say I think he didn't understand him in some ways. Also, I would say, Ouspensky made some mistakes too. And, but, in actual historical fact, I mean, Gurdjieff drew Ouspensky in. He needed Ouspensky. And this is much the same as with Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, who was this American ex-military man who was a journalist and was very interested in spiritualism, things of that sort. And the two of them, with some other colleagues, formed the Theosophical Society later. But she was this explosive madcap kind of character, the crazy guru, and Gurdjieff was not quite like that, but he was rather how should we say, unconventional kind of character, and they both needed a kind of very good frontman. And I'm not trying to reduce Ouspensky to that, but I think this is Gurdjieff's thinking, because he tells his students to ensnare him, bring him. And Ouspensky had just come back from his own search for the miraculous. I mean, he was in the East, he was in Egypt, in Ceylon, he was in ashrams and Sufi tekkas and all these kinds of things. And he was looking for this wisdom. He was looking for contact with schools, esoteric schools. He couldn't find it, and he came back rather disappointed back to Moscow. And then these students of Gurdjieff went to one of his talks and urged him, no, you must meet Mr. G. And he didn't really want to. Ouspensky had his fill of gurus at that point. And then just to stop them bothering him, he went. And then he realized, here of all places, in a seedy cafe in the back streets of Moscow, I've met what I was looking for. He tells the wonderful story of their time together and Gurdjieff's teachings in in search of the miraculous. But I think Ouspensky's got some bad press, and I think he's an important thinker in his own right. And I have to say, my own kind of interest in the work, I mean, once I left the work, I continued to read about it and all that, but I was more drawn to, not so, well, I mean, the person that I in more recent times, that's involved in sort of the fourth way, I was reading a lot of was Maurice Nicoll, who was one of Ouspensky's students, and he wrote those wonderful psychological commentaries on the, you know, the teachings of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. It's like 7 volumes. And there are these talks that he gave to his own groups. He started his own groups after Ouspensky sort of said, no, it's time for you to leave the nest and it's time for you to teach. And so what I like about Nicoll is that he's kind of, he's very congenial. He's a warm kind of character. He's a good bedside manner. He's a doctor, so, you know, understandably so. I mean, Ouspensky's a bit severe. Gurdjieff, you know, I've read Beelzebub, you know, I have to say personally, you know, it's not something I wouldn't take it with Desert Island Discs, but, you know, maybe I'd have the time to read it and really get it then. No, I'm not saying this, I'm joking. I mean, of course, it's one of these, you know, it's incredible kind of work. But I would say I think Ouspensky got some bad press, and I wanted to pay a debt of thanks to him for his influence on these, and so I wrote the book.
I see. Gary, we have only a few minutes left, a couple, so maybe we will, if you're happy to answer one more question.
Sure,
that's
sure.
coming anonymously. It says, as it is the death day of Madame Blavatsky, I assume the anniversary of the death of Madame Blavatsky, do you have any interesting stories you can share about her? I know you've mentioned her already before, but anything that's...
Well, I mean, yeah, it's White Lotus Day. This was the day she died in 1891, not too far from where I live. She lived in Annie Besant's house on Avenue Road, which is over by Regent's Park for me. I'm in sort of West Hampstead, and it's not too far. Well, the story I like to tell about Blavatsky is that she too gets a lot of bad press, not in the same way, you know, because she wrote about root races and things of that sort in The Secret Doctrine. She's often been kind of tagged as a racist and the person responsible for informing some notions of the Aryan race and that kind of thing. But one of the persons she influenced profoundly was Gandhi. And when Ouspensky was living here in London in her last days, 2 of her students, 2 theosophists, bumped into Gandhi, and they were absolutely thrilled to meet a Hindu, and absolutely thrilled, you know, to have anything to do with Hindu culture and all that. That's another thing that Blavatsky was, you know, very important for. You know, she reintroduced Buddhism to Buddhists. You know, she reintroduced the Hindu teachings and scriptures to Hindus, because the Christian missionaries had, you know, sort of told them all that was rubbish. But in any case, so they were you know, fascinated to meet him. And as I say in my talks, I mean, Gandhi was busy trying to be Ben Kingsley. You know, he was wearing the bowler hat and the umbrella and all that kind of thing. And they said to him, "Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful for us to read the Bhagavad Gita together in the original language?" And Gandhi had to admit he had never read it in any language, because in the missionary school he went to, they, as I said, they told him that that was rubbish, and, you know, there was superstition and all that, and he had to read the Bible. And so they said, well, in that case, you must meet Madame Blavatsky. So they took Gandhi to meet Madame Blavatsky, and she introduced the Bhagavad Gita to him. And from that day, it became the most important book to him in his life. And his whole philosophy of, you know, non-violence and all of that comes out of it. And even on the day he died, when he was assassinated, he had written, you know, earlier that day in the journal that they put out that, what was it? Theosophy is Hinduism in theory, and Hinduism is theosophy in practice. So you often don't get that. You know, you get, oh, how, you know, not Blavatsky was picked up by these, you know, sort of proto-Nazis in Austria in the whatever late 19th century, yeah, they did, but you know, Gandhi, he went on to do something really different.
That's all the time we have this evening, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. There's a lot of questions which I will post to you. Maybe people can post them to your website if you tell them what that is, where they can find it.
If you have that information out, go ahead. I mean, I can't say I'll answer everything, but if you want to, yeah, sure. What else is happening? Anything's coming up? Well, I mean, I post. I'm on Twitter and all that too. So if you want to say hello.
Lots of unanswered questions here. I have some of which would have started whole new conversations. So let's end it here. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon live in a proper auditorium with people clapping at the end.
Okay. Well, my pleasure. Absolutely.